Welcome to Tudor marriage. Your gown is heavy. Your future is short. Your marriage is not about love. It's not about compatibility, affection, shared interests, or the way your eyes sparkle in candlelight. It's about treaties, borders, lineage, dowries. You're not a person, not really. You're a bundle of assets wrapped in lace, a way for your father to climb higher on the noble ladder, a womb with a name and a vaguely acceptable bloodline. Henry doesn't fall in love with you. He reviews your qualifications. You're a resume in silk. You start appearing on shortlists around age 12. Not in person, of course. That would be indecent. No, at first it's just chatter. Your family name gets tossed around over wine. Your older sisters are assessed, weighed, discarded. Maybe one made too much eye contact. Maybe another had a mole that looked suspiciously like a political liability. But you're promising. You've got the right posture, the right manners, the right balance of demure and fertile. Most importantly, you haven't said anything clever at dinner. That makes you ideal. Your mother teaches you how to curtsy, so low your knees crack. Your father beams when you blush at compliments. They call this preparation, but you know what it really is by conditioning. You're being trained to vanish politely inside a crown. You learn to smile just enough, speak just little enough, walk like you're floating and think like you're invisible. The perfect queen in waiting is graceful, unthreatening, and medically optimized for reproduction. When word comes that the king is looking for a new wife, which, let's be honest, is roughly every few years, your family snaps into action like a merchant preparing a prized horse for auction. You are dressed in your finest, paraded through court, and introduced to people with titles so long they have to pause for breath halfway through. You are not asked if you're interested. No one cares. You are encouraged to make an impression, which is noble code for look decorative and don't embarrass us. Henry, for his part, is already bored. He's been through a few rounds of this. The tragic first wife who couldn't give him a son. The seductive second wife who did, but gave him the wrong gender. The third who managed to die before falling from favour. The courtship process, by now, is more of a casting call than a romance. Henry wants someone young, obedient, and preferably unable to form coherent political opinions. You, unfortunately, check all the boxes. Portraits are commissioned, descriptions are exchanged. Holbein, the king's favourite artist, is probably somewhere with a paintbrush, trying to capture your better angles while also not offending the monarchy. He walks the line between honesty and flattery, like his neck depends on it, because it does. Meanwhile, the king stares at painted women the way modern men scroll dating apps, with a mix of indifference, entitlement, and the delusion that perfection is just one more swipe away. And then it happens. Your name is picked, or rather, your name is deemed acceptable enough under current circumstances. No one uses the word love. Instead, they say suitable, comely, of good character. They say you'll make a fine queen, which is rich coming from people who have never once asked what kind of person you actually are. You're escorted to court, placed in a well-lit corner like a valuable statue, and introduced to the king in a scene that feels more like hostage negotiation than flirtation. Henry looks you over the way a man might assess livestock, not cruelly, just clinically. He smiles. You smile. He comments on your grace. You compliment his hunting skills. He laughs like someone who hasn't been told no in a very long time. You try to pretend you don't know how this ends. Your family's thrilled. They whisper things about elevation, about legacy, about how you've brought honour to your house. You try not to scream. You try not to picture the faces of the women who came before you. One exiled, one executed, one buried in a hurry. You wonder if this is bravery or just extremely advanced manners. There is a feast in your honour. The meat is too rich, the wine flows freely, and somewhere a bard is already composing a ballad about your beauty that will conveniently omit the fact that you're terrified. You smile through it all, pose for more portraits, and try to memorise the layout of the palace in case you ever need to run. No one says the word trap, but everyone knows it. It hangs in the air like incense, sweet, smoky, and meant to distract from the scent of something rotting underneath. You are entering a life of silks and poisons. You are being wrapped in gold leaf and handed to a man who has made a hobby of destroying the women closest to him. You are told this is honour. You are told this is destiny. You are told this is what every girl dreams of. But you're not dreaming. You're waking up into a world where your choices have already been made, your future already written, your body already claimed. Congratulations, you've been picked by a tyrant. It begins with a look. Not a glance, a look. Heavy, weighted, the kind of gaze that makes your spine straighten without quite knowing why. Henry sees you across the court, or at a masque, or during some carefully choreographed display of your embroidery skills, and for whatever reason, you are suddenly interesting. Not as a person, of course, as a concept, a candidate, an option. The light catches your face at the right angle, or you drop your eyes with just the right amount of tragic grace. And now, on his mind, and more importantly, on his list. And that's where things get complicated, because technically, he's married, again. Still, his current wife may be dead or dying or simply disappointing, but the paperwork hasn't been filed yet. The church is still frowning. Parliament is still grumbling. The last marriage may have ended in childbirth or an execution, and in Henry's mind, that's practically a blank slate. You're expected to pretend none of that matters, that this is the beginning of something pure, something romantic, something other than a public audition for survival. So Henry woos, or at least he performs wooing, with music, with letters, with poetry so florid it borders on vascular disease. He sends you gifts, fabrics, pearls, a small dog that probably isn't house-trained. Courtiers deliver compliments with all the subtlety of cannon fire. Everyone watches you blush. You're supposed to blush. You're supposed to smile, look down, and pretend it's not terrifying to be suddenly desirable to a man whose love life doubles as a coroner's case log. You're expected to be charmed, and you do your best. You recite practiced lines. You walk through the gardens while pretending not to notice you're being followed. You perform innocence while desperately calculating how many women have curtsied themselves into coffins before you. Courtship here is not about getting to know someone. It's about navigating a minefield blindfolded, while everyone around you applauds your grace. Henry, for his part, is skilled at this game. He knows how to flatter, how to command attention, how to make a woman feel like the center of the universe, right before casually rearranging the cosmos to make room for someone else. He will tell you that you are beautiful, unique, destined. He may write you verses about your eyes or your soul, or some vague metaphor about flowers and virtue that sounds sweet until you remember the last flower ended up 6 feet under. But he means it in the moment. That's the trick. Henry believes in passion the way a fire believes in warmth. It's real while it lasts, and when it's gone, so are you. The rest of the court is watching naturally. They whisper, they speculate, they decide in real time whether you're a future queen or a future cautionary tale. Some are supportive, others are jealous. Most are just curious about how long you'll last. The women smile at you with sympathy they hope they never have to use themselves. The men try not to look directly at you in case they're accused of seducing the king's not yet wife. Even your own ladies in waiting develop that faintly condescending tone people use around horses they expect to be sold for glue. Meanwhile, you rehearse. Every expression, every word, every movement. You rehearse flattery, deference, wit, but not too much of it. Pride, but only the kind that makes your posture better. You learn quickly that Henry likes to be challenged, just not in public, that he appreciates intelligence as long as it doesn't outshine his own, that your opinion should be strong enough to seem sincere, but soft enough to be dismissed if they make him uncomfortable. It's not a conversation, It's a performance, and the audience has a sword. Sometimes you let yourself wonder what might happen if you spoke honestly, if you asked about his past wives, what he thought, what he felt, why he stopped loving them, but you don't. Because the truth is never the point. You are not building a relationship. You are walking a tightrope over a moat full of ghosts. Everyone is pretending. You pretend not to know his temper. He pretends not to notice your fear. The courtiers pretend to believe this will end differently. You all know the script, and none of you believe the ending. But the courtship continues, because it must, because momentum is a force of its own. 1 week it's letters, the next it's a ring. Before you know it, you're being fitted for gowns and coached on how to accept praise without sounding too pleased. You're told how to stand, how to kneel, how to smile when the Archbishop of Canterbury mumbles something about sacred unions and divine appointments. No one asks if you're happy. They ask if you're ready. And maybe you are, or maybe you just know better than to hesitate. Because hesitation is dangerous. Hesitation implies doubt, and doubt implies disloyalty. And disloyalty, well, you've read the records. You've seen what happens to women who get labelled difficult, or cold, or simply inconvenient. You don't want to be one of those wives. You want to be the exception. The one who lasts, the one who is loved so fiercely, she is protected rather than discarded. But deep down, you know that love isn't what keeps you safe here. Timing does. Fertility, obedience, the right amount of charm, laced with fear. You laugh at his jokes. You flatter his calves. You pretend not to notice the way his eyes wander. You learn to survive not by winning his heart, but by dodging his wrath. This is Tudor courtship, a game of appearances played with knives. The king is watching. The court is watching. God, supposedly, is watching. And you? You're trying to stay perfectly still, hoping the spotlight doesn't suddenly become a crosshair. Welcome to Romance Royal Edition. You're the prize. You're the bait. You're the next in line. And the curtain's already rising. There are bells, of course. They ring loud enough to rattle the bones of the last queen. You wake to the sound of them, already exhausted from a night of prayers and anxiety-induced indigestion. Today is your wedding day. You are to be married to a king, to the king. And that's supposed to mean something, though at the moment, all it really means is that you're about to be sewn into 20 pounds of fabric and handed over like an extremely elaborate dowry basket. The dress is white, but not for the reasons you think. Not for innocence, not for purity. Those are convenient fictions invented later. No, this white is political. It's performative. A royal blank slate embroidered with gold thread and pearls the size of your fingernail. It's designed not to flatter you, but to reflect him. You shimmer like a trophy, like a flag, like a warning. You can't breathe properly, but that's not important. You're not here to breathe. You're here to belong, visibly, legally, and irrevocably. The procession begins before you're ready. It always does. Servants whisper prayers under their breath as they lace your bodice tight enough to bruise. Courtiers fawn. Ladies in waiting coo. Somewhere, a group of boys is tossing flower petals with the lifeless enthusiasm of people forced to celebrate something they don't understand. Outside, the streets are lined with people who've never met you, but are already certain they like you, or hate you, based on what rumours made it past the palace walls. When you step into the chapel, the air changes. It's thick with incense and ambition. Tapestries drape every surface. Candles flicker in their sconces, like they're nervous for you. The altar is draped in velvet, the pews packed with nobles who've suddenly taken an interest in religion. And there, waiting for you like a monarch-shaped inevitability, is Henry. He's in his finery today, robes layered like a walking reliquary, jewels stitched into every visible surface, his beard trimmed, his eyes sharp, his expression carefully set to benevolent. He doesn't smile, not really. He allows himself to appear pleased, as if this is all just a particularly successful banquet he's decided to attend. as if you're not a person, but a particularly valuable diplomatic solution with good teeth. The ceremony proceeds. It's long. Not because there's much to say, the vows themselves are brisk and formulaic, but because this is, above all, a performance. Each word is soaked in symbolism. Each blessing is a public relations maneuver. Bishops murmur about divine order. Courtiers lean forward to catch your expression. The music swells. You smile at all the right moments, though your jaw is starting to ache. You keep your eyes down, but not too far. You don't want to seem gloomy. You're not sad, you're honoured. That's the story, and you'll repeat it until it becomes true, or you die trying. When you say "I do," it isn't just a vow, it's a surrender. Not just to the man standing beside you, but to the system he embodies. One where your body is currency and your silence is an expectation. He slides a ring on your finger, and the crowd exhales as though relieved to see this part go smoothly. You are now, officially, a royal possession, a living treaty, a decorative extension of his divine authority. The kiss is brief and awkward, not passionate, too public for that, but not chaste enough to ignore. It's a punctuation mark, not a sentence, a reminder to everyone watching that this union is both spiritual and political, and that your body now belongs to the crown in every possible sense. You smile again. It's beginning to feel like a reflex. Afterward, there is feasting. Endless, gluttonous feasting. Roast boar, glazed swan, sugared almonds, wine that tastes more like warm fruit than actual alcohol. The hall is sweltering with candle heat and the breath of too many people wearing too many layers. You are paraded through it all, toasted, praised, ogled. People make jokes about heirs. Some are subtle, some are not. You laugh, you always laugh, because laughter buys you grace even when it feels like a tax. Henry is in high spirits, for now. He leans close to whisper compliments. He makes grand pronouncements about the future. He refers to our son before there's even been a wedding night. You nod along. You say the right things. You pretend not to notice the looks from the older nobles, the ones who've seen this before, who remember the other wives, who are already placing bets on how long you'll last. There's a dance, a blur of silks and stomping and court musicians who don't know how to read the room. You're too tired to remember the steps, but you smile anyway. You have to. The Queen must always smile, especially on her wedding night, even if her feet ache, even if her head throbs, even if the weight of expectation is already pressing down hard enough to leave a bruise. Eventually, the festivities slow. The guests begin to slur their compliments. The servants begin to clear dishes. Someone extinguishes the candles. The music fades into background noise. And then it's time. Time to leave the crowd, the pageantry, the illusions. Time to walk, hand in hand, toward the marital chambers. You know what's waiting there. So does he. But this part isn't about desire. It's about proof, about lineage, about putting your body on the line, literally, to ensure the future of a dynasty that does not particularly care about your survival. You undress slowly, your gown pooling at your feet like a sigh of resignation. The room smells like roses and old sweat. The sheets are clean. You lie down. You look up, and you try to forget that this is only the beginning. Tomorrow the gossip will start. Did the king look pleased? Did the sheets show proof? Did she do her duty? Did she seem satisfactory? You won't be asked these questions directly, but they'll still be answered by whispers, by glances, by the slow erosion of your privacy. Today, you became a queen. Tomorrow, you become a womb. Congratulations, you're married now, and you've never been more alone. Now that you're officially queen, crowned, bedded, and publicly congratulated, your body is no longer just a symbol. It's a project, a national priority. Your most private parts are now matters of public interest, whispered about by bishops and bureaucrats with equal fervour. You are no longer evaluated by your charm, your courtly graces, or your ability to flatter a man in tights. You are now evaluated by the state of your uterus. The pressure begins before your wedding night sheets have cooled. It starts with glances at your belly that last a second too long, with unsolicited prayers from the Archbishop, with hopeful murmurs from ladies who've been strategically assigned to your chamber, not to protect your modesty, but to report any rumours of morning sickness. The court physician begins visiting more often. You've developed a persistent soreness in your lower back, and somehow that becomes a matter of political relevance. You sneeze and 3 midwives start taking notes. At first they're gentle. You're young, you have time. Henry smiles when you enter the room. He brings you fruits said to increase fertility and calls you his rose, his treasure, his future. You allow yourself to believe he means it, that he is patient, that he is kind, that he understands biology cannot be rushed. But biology is not the issue. Expectations are. Every month that passes without an heir, a son to be precise, chips away at that fragile illusion of royal goodwill. If you're lucky, you might conceive quickly. But even then, the test is not whether you get pregnant. It's whether the result cries loudly and has testicles. If it doesn't, your triumph becomes a disappointment. And if it ends before it begins, a miscarriage, a stillbirth, a baby too small or too still to save, it becomes a scandal cloaked in condolences. When it happens, because it almost always does, at least once, the reaction is swift and unbearable. The whispers begin before the blood has even dried. Courtiers lower their eyes when you pass. Servants speak more softly. You are ushered away from the public eye under the guise of rest, but you know what's really happening. Damage control. You are no longer a radiant queen in bloom. You are a failed investment, a cautionary tale still wearing a crown. They ask if you fell, if you overexerted yourself, if your thoughts were too troubled, if you've angered God somehow. No one says it outright, but the implication hangs in the air like incense. You must have done something wrong, because Henry cannot fail. He is the image of divine masculinity. If the child dies, it cannot be the king's fault. The problem, logically, must be you. You learn to carry grief silently, to nod politely when someone offers a prayer you didn't ask for, to thank the king for his understanding, even when his eyes already seem to be drifting toward the nearest unclaimed lady-in-waiting. You learn not to cry during official audiences because that implies instability. You learn not to smile too broadly either, because that looks callous. You must exist in a narrow space between composed and maternal, sorrowful enough to seem human, but dignified enough to avoid being labelled hysterical. Eventually, you conceive again. Or maybe you don't. Maybe it takes longer than it should, and your name begins to appear less frequently at banquets. Either way, the court's patience thins. The pressure thickens. You're given herbal tonics, amulets, sermons, suggestions to relax, as if relaxation has ever existed within a 50-mile radius of Henry Tudor. You are sent to pray at shrines. You are told to eat more eels. The advice gets stranger, the more desperate the crown becomes. And when finally you bear a child, if it lives, you hold your breath as they unwrap the cloth and announce the sex. If it's a boy, there is celebration. Bells, feasts, a title prepared before you even open your eyes. If it's a girl, the tone shifts. People still clap. Politely, a princess is better than nothing after all. But it's not what they wanted, not what he wanted. Henry's face tightens just slightly. He kisses your forehead like a man congratulating a soldier who survived but lost the war. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that a healthy daughter is still a miracle. That love doesn't hinge on gender, but you know better. You've seen what happens to women who birth girls and nothing else. They become ghostly figures, margins in the story. Sometimes they're pitied, sometimes they're punished. Always, they're replaced. Each new pregnancy becomes a countdown, each cramp a cause for alarm. You begin to dread the sound of silence in your chamber, because it means people are listening too closely. The queen has coughed. The queen hasn't eaten. The queen has looked sad. Each observation becomes a prophecy. Each prophecy becomes a judgment. Your body betrays you in slow, small ways. A persistent ache in your side. A bleeding that won't stop. A fetus that refuses to quicken. And with every complication, your position becomes shakier. You begin to understand that success in childbirth isn't about health. It's about optics. A swollen belly is a political victory. A dead child is treason by another name. The pressure never fades, even when the child is born, even if he survives, because then comes the expectation of more. One son is a start, but what if he dies? What if he's sickly? What if he grows into a man who says the wrong thing at the wrong time and ends up executed for it? You must produce spares. The phrase is said casually, but you feel it like a threat. Your womb is not a blessing, it's a factory. And factories don't rest just because they've met their quota. Eventually, you learn not to hope, not aloud. You smile when you're told to. You nod when they mention heirs and bloodlines and destiny. You retreat inward, not because you've grown cold, but because the alternative is madness. You pray because it helps, or because it doesn't. Either way, it gives you something to do with your hands. This is the game, the heir game. Produce or perish. Smile through the blood. Breathe through the pain. Pretend the stakes aren't as high as they are. Pretend your value doesn't start and end with what you carry between your hips. Pretend this crown doesn't come with a ticking clock. You wake up early because queens don't get to sleep in, at least not publicly. A servant draws back the velvet curtains with the reverence of someone unveiling a sacred relic, and sunlight pours into your chamber, whether you asked for it or not. The air smells like beeswax polish, rose water, and the faint, sour memory of last night's fear. You didn't sleep well. You never do. But no one wants a tired queen. They want a radiant one. So you sit up, smile faintly, and prepare to be assembled like a particularly delicate piece of furniture. Dressing takes most of the morning. It's not just a matter of putting on clothes. It's a ceremony in itself. Every layer means something. Chemise, kirtle, farthingale, bodice, sleeves, overskirt, underskirt, stockings, shoes, jewellery, veil, girdle. The corset alone could qualify as a weapon if thrown hard enough. The final weight of it all is oppressive. At least 40 pounds of velvet, bone, and brocade wrapped around a body that's expected to glide like a swan and never sweat. You are not dressed for comfort. You are dressed for appearances, for symbolism, for the message your body's required to send at all times. Regal, fertile, and slightly terrifying in its composure. Breakfast is offered, though you rarely eat. It's hard to chew when your stomach is already tight from nerves and laces. Instead, you sip something lukewarm and vaguely herbal while your ladies chatter about nothing in particular. The harvest, a new falcon, whether the French ambassador's hat is truly that size, or if he's hiding something beneath it. You nod, occasionally contribute, and wonder how many of these women are secretly reporting on your mood. The answer is at least 3, possibly all of them. Then comes the walk. Not for pleasure. Queens don't take strolls, they process. You move through the palace halls with practiced elegance, acknowledging courtiers with small nods and carefully curated smiles. Every expression is an act of diplomacy. If you frown, someone will assume you've quarrelled with the king. If you smile too brightly, someone will decide you're hiding something. If you pause too long near a window, you'll be accused of melancholy. Everything you do is read like scripture by people who worship gossip more than God. You attend court, always. You must be seen, present, graceful, silent unless summoned. You sit on a throne slightly smaller than Henry's, angled just enough to signify that your power is decorative. Petitioners speak, foreign dignitaries flatter, nobles manoeuvre. You listen, occasionally interject with a gentle suggestion, and then pretend you weren't interrupted. You're expected to know everything, but to pretend you know nothing unless asked. If you appear too intelligent, you're overreaching. If you say too little, you're dull. The tightrope never ends. At midday, there's music, a performance, a gift ostensibly. A court musician stands before you with his lute and sings a composition that may or may not be about your womb. A Rose Yet Unbloomed is the title, subtle by Tudor standards. Everyone claps politely. You smile, your face a mask so perfect it should be displayed in the tower after your death. Later, someone will suggest the song was a compliment. You'll nod. You're used to compliments that sound like eulogies. Lunch follows, elaborate, excessive, mostly wasted. Peacocks glazed in wine, quails stuffed with grapes, cheeses moulded into questionable shapes. You eat a little, always delicately. The court watches how much you take, what you touch, whether you favour certain dishes. A craving could mean pregnancy. A refusal could mean illness. Someone will whisper either way. The king may or may not join you. If he does, you're more of a centrepiece than a companion. He holds court even at table, surrounded by flatterers who laugh a second too late and toast his virility with alarming frequency. You smile, always smile. The afternoon is reserved for feminine pursuits, needlework, reading scripture aloud, supervising the education of noble girls who have been brought to court to serve you, flatter you, and eventually replace you. Sometimes you play cards, sometimes you walk in the gardens, trailed by maids and guards, and the crushing realization that even outdoors you are never alone. Occasionally, you meet with ambassadors. These are the moments you enjoy, the few instances when intelligence is not only permitted but expected. You speak French, you quote Virgil, you smile at double entendres and deliver your own, with enough poise to earn a chuckle and a sideways glance. Then the meeting ends, and you go back to being the royal metaphor. Evening brings more pageantry, banquets, masks, revelry performed with the stiff cheer of a palace that has seen too many ghosts. You are dressed again, a second gown, more jewels, your hair arranged like a sculpture. You dance even when your feet ache. You laugh even when the jokes are tired. You entertain visiting lords who assess your smile like a farmer eyeing livestock. You toast your husband, your kingdom, your own growing myth. You do not drink too much. A tipsy queen is a cautionary tale. Eventually, you're allowed to return to your chambers. You're undressed by hands that know the routine better than your own. The weight of your day, literal and figurative, is peeled away in layers. You sit before a mirror and stare at a face that no longer looks surprised by anything. Not the rumours, not the pressure, not the way your husband seems less interested in you when the courtiers laugh too loudly at another woman's joke. Before bed, there are more prayers. You kneel, you whisper, you ask for strength, for a son, for something resembling peace. You ask for your body to behave, for your husband to stay patient, for tomorrow to be the same, but not worse. You climb into bed alone or not. Either way, the silence that follows is familiar and heavy. This is your life, not in moments, but in endless repetition. The same gowns, the same questions, the same cautious choreography of someone who cannot afford to misstep. You are queen, revered, adored, scrutinized, replaceable, and tomorrow you will do it all again. Because queens don't rest, they endure. The first thing to change is the waistline. Slowly at first, a little more fabric in the doublet, a wider sash. The tailor is discreet, but not discreet enough. You notice the seams stretch tighter each season. The court notices too, though no one says anything aloud. Not at first. He's still the king after all. Still virile, still magnificent, still the embodiment of divine right, just with a growing fondness for goose pie, and a tendency to nap in chairs too small for his increasingly ambitious backside. Next, the leg wound reappears, the old jousting injury from years ago. You heard about it when you first arrived. whispered like legend. The moment when young Henry, golden and gallant, was thrown from his horse in a moment of reckless, manly glory. It was supposed to be heroic, romantic, and perhaps it was, back when it was fresh. Now, it refuses to heal. It festers. It oozes. The smell precedes him like a fanfare of rot. You try not to flinch when he walks into the room. You try not to breathe through your nose. That would be ungracious. The wound changes everything. He limps, he grunts, he avoids stares, and he grows impatient with anyone who still expects him to move like the athlete he once was. He compensates with louder proclamations, more wine, and increasing bursts of temper that arrive without warning. One moment he's telling a bawdy joke, the next he's screaming at a page for mispronouncing Latin. You learn to read his moods before they crest. The tension in his shoulders, the twitch in his eye. You time your compliments like you're diffusing a bomb. His appetites grow as his charm fades. Meals stretch longer, meat disappears in fistfuls. He drinks like he's trying to drown something he can't name. Women still flock to him, or at least the idea of him, but the flirtation feels different now. Less like courtly sport and more like survival. His compliments have become cruder, louder, and more frequent. You learn to laugh at the right moments, nod at the right compliments, feign interest when he references hunting trips. You're fairly certain he never actually took. Privately, he's grown touchier, more suspicious. He doesn't sleep well. He mutters sometimes about betrayal, about God, about the ever-present possibility that someone, maybe you, is plotting against him. His dreams are filled with omens. He wakes in a sweat, demanding your reassurance. You offer it, of course. What else can you do? You stroke his hand. You murmur prayers. You lie, gently and repeatedly, because you know the truth is not what he wants. The truth is that he's not aging gracefully. The truth is that the crown is heavy, and his body is failing, and you're both trapped in a palace, built entirely on denial. You're expected to act as though nothing has changed, to smile when he approaches, to blush when he gropes, to pretend the man you now serve is still the gallant prince from your wedding day. The court does the same. They laugh when he laughs. They nod gravely when he rants about betrayal. They call him wise even when he forgets what he said 10 minutes ago. No one wants to be the first to admit that the king is fading, that he is bloated, bitter, and just a little mad. Behind closed doors, however, the whispers begin. About his ulcers, about his paranoia, about the way he started quoting scripture with a feverish intensity that suggests less devotion and more desperation. Some say the wound poisons his mind. Others say it's divine punishment. Still others say nothing, because even gossip has limits when the king has a tendency to behead his disappointments. The scent gets worse. It clings to his clothes, his bedclothes, his courtiers. You try not to recoil when he sits beside you. You try not to let your eyes water. It's not his fault, you remind yourself. He is unwell. He is burdened. He is still your husband. But it's difficult to think romantic thoughts when the man beside you smells like he's already halfway to the tomb. Conversations become harder. Not because he can't speak. He can. Loudly, at length. But he repeats himself. He asks the same questions twice. He forgets things he said earlier. And when you try to gently redirect him, to remind him, to guide him back to the moment, he glares like you've insulted his soul. He is not old, he insists. He is not ill. He is England. His vanity grows sharper as his faculties dull. He demands paintings that show him young. He punishes anyone who glances too long at his leg. He surrounds himself with flatterers who speak only in praises and never use past tense verbs. He is obsessed with legacy now, with how he will be remembered. He speaks often of sons, of thrones, of enemies. You begin to wonder if he remembers who you are, or if he just sees a warm body and a crown. You dread the nights now, not just for what might be expected of you, but for what you'll see up close. The way his body strains against the bed, the way he groans when he moves, the way his breath smells of wine and bile, and the way he reaches for you with a kind of desperate, angry hunger that has nothing to do with affection. You lie still, you smile, you survive, and in the morning you rise early again, and the cycle begins anew. The makeup, the gowns, the smiling parade of symbols, the illusion of a court still ruled by a golden prince, even as the throne creaks under the weight of a man who is slowly, unmistakably, rotting from the inside out. You do not speak of it, no one does, but you all smell it. It starts small, it always does. A missed curtsy from a lady in waiting, a note from the ambassador that goes unanswered for a day too long, a moment during supper when you fail to laugh at the king's joke quickly enough, or maybe you laugh too long. These things are trivial, forgettable, unless people are already watching, and they always are. One morning you enter the great hall and feel it immediately. A shift, almost imperceptible, like a room inhaling without exhaling. The courtiers still bow, the ladies still smile. But something's different. Their eyes slide past you quicker. Their compliments are less specific. Someone who used to cling to your sleeve during feasts now seats herself 2 chairs away. Your name is still spoken, but not as often, not as warmly. You think maybe it's nothing. Maybe you imagined it. Maybe you're being paranoid. After all, Henry hasn't said anything. He still kisses your hand. He still calls you sweetheart. But the kisses are perfunctory now. The endearments land dull. He doesn't look at you when he says them. He looks past you, or worse, through you, as if he's already picturing a new face in your crown. And then it happens. The thing that flips the switch. Maybe you ask a question in council. Maybe you roll your eyes too openly at a sermon. Maybe someone claims to have overheard you complaining about the food or the heat or the king's latest poem, which rhymed glory with story 3 times in a row. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The truth of it is irrelevant. The perception is everything. The rumours come fast. You're difficult. You're cold. You're barren. You favour the wrong faction. You spend too much time alone. You flirt with the musicians. You've been secretly meeting with the Spanish envoy. You've insulted the Dowager Duchess's embroidery. You've refused to attend Mass. You've been caught crying. Or worse, not crying enough. Each new accusation is a thread, and the court weaves them quickly into a shroud. Even your allies hesitate now. No one wants to go down with you. A friend who once defended you at every turn now gives non-committal shrugs when your name is mentioned. Another begins spending more time near Henry's sister. You are not being betrayed, you're being abandoned. There's a difference, though it doesn't help. Henry changes next, at first subtly. A pause before he greets you, a tightened jaw when you speak. He stops asking for your opinions. He starts referring to you in the third person when you're in the room. Her Grace feels unwell. The Queen prefers to rest. She is delicate lately. You're becoming a problem to be managed, not a partner to be heard. You try to recover, to smile more, flatter more, appear more at ease. You dance, you pray, you host elaborate banquets and laugh at everyone's jokes until your throat hurts. You compose loving little notes, scented with rose oil and smudged with effort. Henry barely reads them. When he does, he remarks that your handwriting's becoming erratic. You wonder if you should have used a different ink. You wonder when ink became a political minefield. Your ladies mirror the shift. They watch you more closely now, take longer to help you dress, whisper just a little more quietly. One drops a brush and doesn't apologise. Another corrects your Latin. You correct her back, gently, perfectly. And she blushes, but not from embarrassment, from resentment. You realise you've become someone it's no longer dangerous to disrespect. You hear your name in doorways, see glances exchanged behind fans. The palace that once revolved around you now revolves past you. Your existence is no longer the sun. It is a shadow everyone steps over. You plead your case not dramatically, not publicly. That would be suicide. but in private moments, during walks, over wine, you remind Henry of your loyalty, your piety, your love. You bring up shared memories, victories, that one time he said, no one had ever understood him like you. He nods, he agrees, he says you're overthinking things, he says everything is fine. Then he starts spending more time with your replacement. She's younger, of course, fresher, more agreeable. She has a way of tilting her head when he speaks, as if every word is the key to the universe. She asks innocent questions about things you already know, the hunting dogs, the tax rolls, the names of every cousin he's ever exiled. And he answers like a schoolboy. You say nothing. You pretend not to notice. You pretend you're fine. Everyone pretends, until one day you're not pretending anymore. One day you enter the council chamber and your chair has been moved. No one explains why. They don't need to. You're being edged out, inch by inch, gesture by gesture. It is not loud. It is not sudden. It is a slow drowning in the shallowest of waters, and you're expected to smile the entire time. You could protest, but that would be emotional. You could sulk, but that would be ungrateful. You could cry, but that would be unstable. So you do the only thing left. You try to hold still. Maybe if you're quiet enough, compliant enough, invisible enough, the tide will turn. Maybe you'll be forgiven. Maybe Henry will wake up one morning and remember he loved you. He doesn't. Instead, he looks at you during dinner one night and calls you by your sister's name. The table goes silent. You smile. Because what else is there to do? You are summoned, not informed. There is no discussion. No quiet walk to the royal apartments for an awkward conversation. No note from Henry offering clarification. Just men in stiff doublets and colder expressions appearing in your doorway like punctuation marks. The kind that end things. They do not explain what you've done. They don't need to. They tell you the king has concerns. They say it politely, but their hands hover near their swords. You've seen enough plays to know how this act ends. You're not taken to the tower immediately. That would be gauche. First there is protocol, ceremony, the facade of legal process. You are placed under guard, but with window access and meals served on gold. You are allowed visitors carefully chosen. You still wear your title. For now, the illusion of dignity must be preserved until it's no longer useful. After all, you're not just a criminal, you're a queen. And queens don't get arrested, they get escorted. The charges arrive on parchment thicker than your veil. You're accused of adultery, treason, incest, witchcraft, subverting the natural order of the court, slandering the king, smiling at the wrong man, weeping too theatrically, touching your stomach in public, as if mourning a child that may or may not have ever existed. The list is long, dramatic, and weirdly specific. The literary effort of men who have clearly never spoken to you but feel confident they understand your sins. You read it all in silence. You're not surprised. But the witchcraft accusation still earns a bitter laugh. So this is what it's come to. When a woman threatens a king's narrative, she must be magical. The trial is swift, though it pretends not to be. Witnesses are summoned. Many you know, a few you trusted. They say what they're told to say. One swears you danced too close to a courtier. Another claims he heard you whisper Latin in your sleep. One servant testifies that your chambers smelled of herbs too foreign, too pungent. The room nods gravely, as if that alone confirms you summoned a demon. You want to ask if anyone remembers your years of loyalty, of restraint, of carefully timed smiles, and humiliating compliance. You don't. You know it wouldn't help. The evidence is laughable if you can still find laughter. A handkerchief dropped near the stables, a letter that doesn't exist, but is quoted from memory by someone who never learned to read. A ring found in your drawer that used to belong to another woman entirely. An anonymous account of your wild eyes during evening prayers. The accusations are crafted like fiction, layered, dramatic, written to stir emotion, not to withstand logic. And logic isn't invited to this performance. Henry doesn't attend. Of course not. That would imply guilt or compassion. He stays at a safe distance, surrounded by sycophants who assure him that this is necessary, that the people demand justice, that the nation needs closure, that his masculinity will recover faster if yours is destroyed publicly. You are no longer a wife to him. You are a political problem, a story that went on too long, a failed chapter in a book that wants a happier ending, preferably one that starts with a new queen and a healthy male heir. The judges are men appointed by the king. They wear black and speak in riddles, carefully chosen phrases that sound solemn but mean nothing. They address you with formal courtesy, but never warmth. They nod as witnesses contradict each other. They murmur at invented timelines. They glance at the gallery, making sure the whispers from the crowd are trending in the right direction. The outcome was decided before the summons was even sent. You're not on trial. You're being processed. And yet you sit straight. You answer calmly. You deny what can be denied, refute what's absurd, and say nothing about the rest. You do not cry. Not here. Not in front of men who believe tears are proof of instability. You do not rage. Rage is for those still clinging to the idea that they might win. You play the part with the same elegance you were trained to use at court. After all, if they're going to kill you, the least you can do is haunt them afterward with your posture. The court pretends to deliberate. It's adorable. They vanish behind a velvet curtain for half an hour, maybe less, and return with faces arranged into somber masks. The sentence is read aloud with the gravity of divine command. You are guilty. Of course, the punishment is death. Of course, they recommend mercy. Of course, because executing a queen is a delicate thing, and history will be watching. Or at least the parts of it Henry doesn't edit. You are to be beheaded. Not burned, thankfully. That would have been too theatrical. And you are spared the axe, a small mercy perhaps, or an aesthetic one. A French sword has been ordered. A single, clean stroke. Fast, regal, less splashy. You wonder how many others had their execution style chosen for public relations purposes. Afterward, you're escorted back to your chambers, not in chains but in silence. The guards avert their eyes. One of them whispers a prayer. You're allowed to write letters. You're told you may choose your gown for the occasion. Something simple, they suggest. Modest, appropriate. You nod. You have nothing left to say to these people. That night, you sit at the window, not to look for escape. That dream died months ago. But because you want to see the sky one more time without a ceiling. You wonder if anyone will remember you for more than your downfall. You wonder what the next queen will wear, whether the people will cheer, whether Henry will sleep soundly. You think of your family, of the girl you once were, of the absurdity of it all. They will take your life tomorrow, but tonight at least you are still whole. And if there's any justice left in the world, any real divine justice, the sword will be sharp. You awaken early, though no one knocks. The tower is silent, heavy in its stillness. The guards are quieter today, not out of respect, they've seen this before, but out of discomfort. Executing a queen still carries a certain ceremonial awkwardness. It's not every day they kill someone with a title and tableware pattern. They don't meet your eyes as they bring your final breakfast. Bread, a little wine, nothing indulgent, nothing too memorable. You eat a little to stop the shaking. You leave the rest. No one remarks on it. You're allowed a confessor. That's tradition. He arrives like a ghost wrapped in black robes, murmuring prayers you've heard too many times to still find comforting. He speaks of grace, of peace, of eternity. You nod politely, the way you're expected to. You recite the expected lines. You confess to the sins you're allowed to have committed. The real ones, the doubts, the fury, the hatred, stay locked behind your teeth. You will not give them the satisfaction of purging your soul on their schedule. You dress, slowly, carefully. You choose the grey gown with the pearl trim. Understated, elegant, impossible to criticise. Nothing red. You don't want to give them symbolism on a silver platter. You want to be remembered for composure, not colour. The bodice is tight, but not uncomfortable. You fasten your headdress with hands that barely tremble. There is no mirror, but you don't need one. You know what they will see. A woman walking to her death in silk. Spine straight, chin lifted. They come for you mid-morning. Not too early. No one wants to behead royalty before breakfast. But not so late as to ruin anyone's plans. The yeomen say nothing. They simply nod. One offers an arm, which you decline. You walk unaided. The courtyard is already full. Nobles, soldiers, foreign envoys, merchants with nothing better to do. Some have climbed walls, others lean out of windows. It's a good turnout. The people love a spectacle, especially one with royal blood and moral lessons baked in. The scaffold is wooden, temporary, surrounded by straw to catch the blood and soften the sound. It smells of rain and varnish. You climb the steps slowly, not from fear, but because you know they're all watching. Not just the crowd, but the scribes, the poets, the gossips. Every step you take will be remembered, or misremembered, or invented entirely. You might as well provide them something real to work with. You reach the platform. The executioner is already there. He bows deeply. He is French as promised. He has brought a sword, long and curved, gleaming in the light. There is no axe today, no messy hacking. This is a cleaner death, or so they claim, as if the tool matters more than the result. You're given a moment to speak. That's tradition too. Final words. You clear your throat and begin, not with tears, not with pleas, but with calm. You thank the king, not because you mean it, but because history demands it. You speak of obedience, of duty, of God's will. You forgive those who wronged you, or at least you say you do. It doesn't matter if you're lying. The performance is the point. Grace under pressure. Nobility in death. A queen even now. The crowd listens. Some cry, some just want you to hurry. One man near the front is sketching. You wonder if he'll capture the slope of your shoulders, or just embellish your posture for drama. You wonder what lies they'll tell about your last words. Whether you smiled, whether you wept, whether you turned pale when the executioner approached. You kneel, a servant ties your hair back. You thank him. You close your eyes, you breathe, deeply. Once, twice. The ground is damp beneath your knees. The wood creaks slightly. Somewhere a bird sings, oblivious, impolite. You think about your childhood, about the way sunlight looked in your family's garden, about the sound of your mother's voice, about the women who came before you, who tried to survive and failed. You wonder if they're watching, if they've saved you a seat. The sword does not announce itself. That is its gift. It is fast. It is silent. It does not make you wait. The executioner distracts you. A whispered prayer, a request for your forgiveness. And while your lips are parting, while your thoughts are still catching up, the blade moves. There is no pain. Just a moment, a flicker where everything stops. The crowd gasps, the birds scatter, the silence swells, and then, like that, it's done. Your body slumps forward, your head drops into the straw. Someone rushes forward to cover you. Not for your sake, but for theirs. Blood spatters neatly, politely, within the bounds of expectation. The crowd exhales, the tension breaks. People begin to murmur, to speculate, to move on. There are errands to run, children to collect, luncheons to attend. By evening, the court is buzzing again. A new dress has been ordered for a new favourite. The king dines well. The musicians play something cheerful. The courtiers laugh too loudly. Someone steps around a bloodstain without comment. You are not mentioned, not yet. But in the morning someone will write a poem. Another will commission a painting. A third will declare you tragic, or wicked, or misunderstood. Whatever sells best. And just like that, you'll become a story. A lesson, a whisper wrapped in velvet. It doesn't take long. In fact, it's impressive how quickly history begins to rearrange itself once your head is in the straw and your blood has stopped steaming. The first thing to go is your portrait. It's taken down quietly, almost reverently, like someone removing a wilted flower from a vase. No one looks at it directly. No one speaks of it. One moment, it's hanging in the great hall, smiling down in paint and pearls. The next, it's gone, rolled up, stacked in a dim storeroom, or tossed into a fire depending on how petty the decorators are feeling that day. Your monogram is scraped from the silverware. Your initials, once embroidered into tapestries and etched into glass, are replaced or erased with startling efficiency. The servants receive new instructions. Your personal staff are reassigned or dismissed. Your dresses are catalogued, picked apart, or repurposed into curtains. The jewellery you once wore with ceremonial dignity is locked away or quietly regifted, parcelled out to whatever woman happens to be next in line for Henry's affections. The crown doesn't waste resources, it recycles them. Even your rooms begin to vanish. Not physically, of course, the stone walls remain, but they are repainted, redecorated, reimagined. The scent of your rosewater is overpowered by lavender and lemon balm. The sheets are changed. The tapestries shift colour. A different name is whispered when the guards refer to the Queen's chambers. Within a week, it's as if you never lived there. Within a month, people are hesitant to admit they knew you. Your friends, or what passed for them at court, adapt quickly. Those who once sang your praises now speak in careful past tense. She was charming. She had spirit. She smiled too much. She didn't know when to keep quiet. They whisper these things over wine, trying to land on the safest version of your memory. Not too fond, not too critical, just enough to signal that they've moved on, that they're loyal to the crown, not to the corpse. Henry, to his credit, pretends to mourn. Briefly, he wears black for the appropriate number of days. He broods at meals, sighing heavily between bites of roasted pheasant. He orders a few masses, stands very still during one of them, and then decides that this is quite enough suffering for one man. By the time your blood has faded from the scaffold, he's already looking at fabric swatches and drafting love notes to someone new. He believes in divine providence after all, and clearly, God would not have allowed your death if it weren't part of some higher matchmaking plan. The palace is redecorated, new flowers, new banners. The musicians are instructed to revise their repertoire to suit a different woman's taste. Court painters begin sketching a new face with all the same flattering brushstrokes they once used on yours. The crown, which once perched delicately on your head, is cleaned and adjusted, resized if necessary, to fit someone else. A new queen will be crowned. She will walk the same halls, sit in the same throne, smile through the same headaches. The role is the same. Only the actress has changed. And you? You are now a cautionary tale, a name spoken in hushed tones or not at all. A what a shame, muttered between spoonfuls of soup. You become less of a memory and more of a moral. Some say you were too bold, others claim you were too quiet. You smiled too often, or not enough. You gave him too many daughters, you gave him no sons. You were ambitious, you were naive. You were, above all, expendable, and no one likes to be reminded of that. The court scribes edit the official records. Your titles are updated. Your marriage is sometimes acknowledged, sometimes not. In certain copies of the royal family tree, you're marked with a small cross or a red line, like an error in penmanship. Your execution is referred to as necessary, your trial as regrettable, and your personhood as complicated. You are not erased, not entirely. That would be too obvious, but you're carefully, methodically diminished. And still, in odd corners of the palace, you remain. Your ghost, metaphorical or otherwise, lingers in ways the decorators can't scrub out. A forgotten comb under a dresser, a book with notes in the margin, a servant who still walks your old route out of habit, a dog that whines at your old door, confused by its new occupant. The people may forget your name, but the walls remember. Some say they've seen you, in the West Wing, on the tower stairs, standing at the window where you used to sit on sleepless nights, watching the fog roll over the Thames. They say your figure appears in the corner of the chapel just before dawn, that your voice, soft, distant, sceptical, sometimes echoes in the great hall when the king laughs too hard. The staff swear the air gets colder on the anniversary of your death. They don't say this to Henry, of course. He has no patience for superstition or reminders. You are not the first, you will not be the last. The crown is always hungry. It devours wives like bread at a royal feast, quickly, quietly, and with an eye toward the next course. Your only lasting legacy may be in how little time it took for you to become irrelevant, a silk-wrapped memory, a misstep in a dynasty that will pretend it never stumbled. But if there's any comfort to be had, it's this. Henry may have removed your portrait. He may have married another. He may have silenced your voice in every hall he walks, but he will never quite forget you. Not completely. Not when the next queen flinches at his tone. Not when the wind makes the tower creak. Not when the crowds gather too quietly at an execution scaffold and refuse to cheer. Because the thing about queens is this. Even the forgotten ones leave shadows. Anne of Cleves was never meant to be extraordinary. She didn't enter court like a tempest, didn't seduce the king with wit or scandal, didn't bleed ambition all over the tapestries. She simply arrived, practical, polite, a bit confused by the pageantry, and walked straight into one of the most dangerous roles in England with the expression of a woman reading a disappointing menu. It was, in retrospect, one of her greatest advantages. The arrangement was diplomatic. Like so many royal marriages, Protestant alliances needed tending, and Henry, at the time, was in one of his periodic moods, jilted, aging, and deeply offended that his last wife had died instead of appreciating the gift of his continued company. His advisors pushed for a German match, and Anne, with her noble pedigree and political neutrality, fit the bill. Her portrait, painted by the ever-flattering Holbein, was met with royal enthusiasm. The king saw it and decided, without further inspection, that she would do nicely. The moment Anne disembarked in England, however, reality began to unravel. Henry, in a burst of poorly thought-out gallantry, disguised himself and barged into her chambers, expecting a swoon. Anne, unaware that this sweaty, red-faced stranger, clutching a dead pheasant, was her future husband, failed to react with appropriate wonder. She did not scream with joy. She did not faint. She looked confused, unimpressed, possibly nauseated. And from that moment on, Henry declared himself betrayed by art. He called her unattractive. Others said horse-faced, though that was more the invention of cruel courtiers than Henry himself. The truth was less cinematic. Anne wasn't repulsive, just entirely uncharmed by a man who expected to be adored for existing. That alone made her dangerous in Henry's eyes. The marriage, already brittle, began to crack before it reached the altar. Still, the ceremony proceeded. He had committed. England expected a queen, and Anne, ever the dutiful outsider, followed instructions. She stood at the altar. She smiled. She recited the vows in careful English, but no one mistook the moment for romance. It had the warmth of a truce. The marriage was unconsummated, a fact Henry repeated often, loudly, to anyone with ears. He claimed she smelled wrong, that her body repelled him. Anne wisely said very little. She neither argued nor defended. She did not press for affection or status. Instead, she observed the king, took in the court, noted the axes quietly being whetted in every corner of the palace, and did the most rational thing imaginable. She agreed with him. Yes, she said, this was a mistake, and for once Henry didn't hear resistance, or judgment, or threat. He heard validation. Anne didn't love him, Anne didn't flatter him, but Anne didn't want anything from him either, and that made her, in his twisted estimation, safe. So the marriage was annulled. The paperwork was fast-tracked. The church declared the union invalid, and Anne, instead of vanishing into scandal or prison or a shallow grave, was given a pension, a new house, and a new title, the king's beloved sister. It sounded warm, it was mostly decorative, but it meant she had a place, and more importantly, a head in the years to come. She stayed in England, she attended court occasionally, she wore sensible gowns and kept her opinions to herself. When Henry paraded his next wives through the palace like doomed show ponies, Anne watched quietly from the sidelines. She smiled politely. She sent gifts. She outlived all of them. You had watched her once back when you were still alive and still trying. You noticed the way she held herself, relaxed, amused, never scrambling for approval. You envied her calm. You wondered how she had done it. The truth, of course, was simple and devastating. Anne of Cleves had survived because she'd understood that being queen was not the prize. It was the warning label. She didn't try to win. She didn't try to change him. She didn't lean into love or flattery or virtue. She read the room, that is, the sweaty, gout-ridden king glaring at her over roast beef, and chose retreat over conquest. It was the opposite of what you had done. You had stayed, you had hoped, you had tried, and you had died. Anne lived out her years in quiet comfort, tucked into the margins of the very history that shredded others. She hosted occasional visitors. She kept a garden. She rode when the weather allowed. When people spoke of her, they used words like pleasant and sensible, which in Henry's England were survival traits masquerading as personality. She died peacefully, long after Henry, long after the wives who followed her, long after anyone expected to hear her name again. No scandal, no spectacle, no final speech on a scaffold. Just a woman who had entered the story briefly, rewritten the ending, and walked away before the house caught fire. In court circles, her name became shorthand for cleverness, for luck, for the art of walking into the lion's den and walking right back out without needing applause. Among queens, she was not the most beloved, but she was the most intact, and after everything, that mattered more. You would have liked her, probably. You might have even envied her in life, quietly and bitterly, while adjusting your crown and forcing a smile. But now, from your distant place in history, where your portrait has been burned and your name scraped from the walls, you can at least appreciate her, the one who didn't fight, the one who didn't love, the one who didn't die for the privilege of being loved by a man who couldn't love anything that bled. Anne of Cleves played the game backward, and she won. By the time Henry had burned through most of his wives, metaphorically and, in a few regrettable cases, quite literally, the eligible noblewomen of England had started to look at marriage proposals from the king the way one might look at a letter bearing the plague seal. The enthusiasm had waned. The available options had dwindled. So Henry, ever the visionary, simply lowered the bar. They say power is attractive, but in this case, it seemed more like a curse with jewellery. Henry was no longer the golden prince of his youth. He was heavy, sullen, unstable, a man held together by velvet, vinegar, and pure indignation. His leg was rotting. His temper was shorter than a lute string. He was still king, of course, still dangerous, still surrounded by flattery masquerading as reverence. But even flattery struggled to make a case for him now. So the wives got younger. Catherine Howard, wife number 5, was barely out of childhood. Somewhere between 15 and 17 when she caught his attention. Old enough to marry by Tudor standards, which is to say, old enough to be used politically and blamed publicly. She was beautiful, flirtatious, and utterly unequipped for what awaited her. She had grown up in the shadows of scandal, raised not by doting parents, but by an overstretched household staff and older girls with loose morals and sharper memories. By the time she met Henry, she was already a woman by court gossip standards, which was the only standard that mattered. He adored her, or at least he adored what she represented: youth, fertility, a second chance at being virile. Catherine giggled at his jokes. She danced. She kissed his ulcered cheek and pretended not to notice the smell of decay. She played the role expected of her, the obedient, giddy bride, while the courtiers whispered that she might finally bring some joy back to the palace. She didn't. What she brought was baggage, a past, rumours of prior dalliances that, once uncovered, became weapons. And once the court decided to care about her morality, her fate was sealed. She had committed the cardinal sin of being fun before marriage and naive afterward. Her past lovers were interrogated, her love letters found, her tears dismissed. She was beheaded less than 2 years after her wedding. Too young to vote by modern standards, too dead to matter by Tudor ones. And yet, she wasn't the last. That honour belonged to Catherine Parr, wife number 6, the final draft, the epilogue. By the time she entered the picture, the crown had lost most of its lustre and all of its stability. Catherine was no child. She was in her 30s, twice widowed, politically astute, and clever enough to see Henry not as a romantic figure, but as a puzzle box filled with explosives. She married him not for love, but because saying no had a long history of ending in execution. Unlike the wives before her, Catherine knew how to play the long game. She nursed him through illness. She humoured his sermons. She published books under her own name, with royal approval, and learned when to keep her opinions folded neatly inside her sleeves. She was nearly caught once, accused of heresy, her name penciled onto one of those ominous lists that preceded sudden arrests. But she cried, grovelled, praised his wisdom, and let Henry believe he had saved her with his mercy. It worked. The charges vanished. She remained. Her triumph wasn't romantic. It wasn't even dignified. It was bureaucratic. She outlasted him. That was it. That was the bar now. Survival by attrition. She remained alive long enough to bury him, to watch the court scramble for relevance in the power vacuum he left behind, to walk away with her head held high and still attached to her neck. But even her victory was bittersweet, because the damage had already been done to the court, to the country, to the women who had filled the role before her like sandbags in a crumbling dam. The legacy of Henry's queens wasn't one of partnership. It was a cautionary tale played 6 times on loop. Love, hope, despair, betrayal, execution, repeat. You had watched it all unfold, once from inside the golden circle, then from outside, as the wheel kept turning without you. Catherine Howard's terror had mirrored your own. Catherine Parr's caution had reminded you of the warnings you had ignored. Each new wife had stepped into the same trap, dressed it differently, and still found herself dangling over the same abyss. It didn't matter how they played the part. The role was cursed. Henry, of course, never saw a pattern. He saw misfortune, betrayal, bad luck. He never blamed himself, only the wives, the advisors, the whims of God. He aged into legend, not because he was great, but because he was loud, relentless, and impossible to ignore. He rewrote the laws of church and country to fit his moods. He reshaped England around his appetites. And then he died, bloated, furious, surrounded by people who lied to him until the last breath. The story of his wives didn't end with him. Their fates became footnotes, whispered warnings, tragic romances. People remembered the execution scenes, the wedding dresses, the court intrigues, but not the lives behind them, not the waiting, the watching, the knowing that one misstep could end in silence and straw. You remembered, because you had lived it and died by it. Anne of Cleves survived by sidestepping the whole machine. Catherine Parr survived by managing it. The others, yourself included, didn't stand a chance. Because Henry didn't want partners. He wanted reflections. And the moment you stopped flattering his image, you were erased. History remembers his wives with a rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. As if those 6 fates tell the whole story. As if they're neat, contained, manageable. But the truth was messier, bloodier, lonelier, slower. The rhyme was catchy, but it never rhymed with justice. You had once imagined that queens were powerful, that crowns conferred safety, that being chosen meant something noble, but queens were queens only until they weren't, and the crown was never a shield. It was a target. You weren't remembered for your laughter, or your voice, or your thoughts about the world. You weren't remembered for the books you favoured, or the way you arranged the folds of your gown, or the exact hue your eyes took on in the morning light. Those things, if anyone had ever cared about them at all, vanished the moment the executioner wiped the blade. What they remembered was simpler, cruder. You were remembered for dying, for not giving the king what he wanted, for failing to contort yourself into the shape of a male heir, for stepping out of place, however briefly, and being crushed back into silence with surgical precision. You were a queen, yes, but only for a time, a placeholder, a pretty, pliant vessel for someone else's ambition, a page torn from a larger volume, taped to a wall as an example of what not to be. Your story became a template, the arc of a doomed wife, picked, praised, discarded, like a seasonal fruit, a decorative trend, the kind of fate that earned gasps in parlours and ballads from bored minstrels. They didn't sing about your intelligence, they sang about your womb. They didn't quote your letters, they quoted your last words, whether or not you actually said them. And those who didn't know your name still remembered your number, because that's how history chose to keep you, as part of a sequence: 6 wives, 1 rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. You were the beheaded, of course, one of the tidy slots carved into a catchy jingle for children to recite in classrooms. They said it with wide eyes and delighted horror, the way they might discuss haunted castles or pirate curses. You were a piece of royal trivia, a tragic emoji in the margin of a family tree. No one remembered your favourite colour. No one remembered what it felt like to be you. Your name survived in books, in tour guides, in footnotes, but not as a person, as a chapter heading, a cautionary tale. The queen who was too proud, too pretty, too unlucky. Historians debated your motives. Poets lamented your fate. Screenwriters gave you dramatic exits and sharp dialogue. But none of them knew the silence of your final nights, the creak of the scaffold stairs, the chill of the morning air against your wrists. Those weren't preserved. Those didn't rhyme. The palace moved on. It always did. New tapestries were hung. New gowns were stitched. A new queen was chosen. Then another and another. Your portrait was taken down or painted over. Your crest removed. Your initials chiselled out from doorways. Even your friends, the ones who had dared to whisper your name with affection, learned to speak of you only in hushed, past tense reverence. To do otherwise was to risk becoming the next cautionary tale, and yet you lingered, not physically. You were buried where they told you to be, in a grave that was convenient, not grand. Your remains were shuffled, possibly even shared, but you lingered in other ways, in rumours, in the little moments that history doesn't record. The glance a maid gave when laying out a wedding dress for the next wife. The way a court musician's hands shook when asked to write another love song. The sudden silence that fell when someone mentioned your name at dinner. Because you weren't forgotten entirely. You had been terrifying after all, not because of what you did, but because of what happened to you. You had reminded people, especially women, that titles weren't armour, that love wasn't a shield, that even queens could be erased mid-sentence and replaced by someone younger, quieter, or more useful. The girls who came after you, the ones raised to dream of crowns, learned to dream smaller, safer. They still married for power, but they did it with a kind of practiced detachment. They wore their jewels like weights, smiled through dinners like diplomats, and some of them whispered about to you, not with pity, but with a kind of reverence, not for what you endured, but for the fact that you dared to exist so boldly in a place that punished boldness. Your legacy wasn't one of triumph, it was one of instruction. You taught the world what happened when a woman failed to entertain the delusions of a man who thought himself divine, when a wife failed to become a myth, when a queen had the audacity to bleed like a commoner and age like everyone else. You didn't get a revolution, you didn't get justice, but you got remembered, for all the wrong reasons, in all the right places. They still write about you, still film you, still reinterpret your silence, but none of them know the whole of you. They never could. The crown made sure of that. It didn't just cut off your head, it cut off the possibility of knowing who you really were. All that remained were fragments, letters that might not be yours, portraits painted to flatter, legends built by those who needed a good ending, or a good warning. You were not the hero, you weren't even the villain, you were the lesson. And centuries later, someone somewhere is still humming your story under their breath, still trying to remember which wife you were, still missing the point entirely. So that was your life. It began with a crown-shaped promise and ended with a clean blade. In between, silk gowns, hollow compliments, late-night prayers for sons who never came, and the slow realization that being queen meant being disposable in velvet. You weren't the first, you weren't the last. You were one name in a series, one jewel in a crown that never fit right. You played your part, you smiled, you curtsied, you died, and history applauded politely before turning the page. They didn't write songs about your dreams, only your womb, your fall, your final words, or the version they preferred. You became a bedtime story for ambitious daughters, a footnote in a king's long list of appetites. You were never the main character, just a plot device with good posture. And yet, you mattered. Not because you changed the world, but because the world changed around you. Because in the echo of your silence, others began to speak. Because the shape of your absence was sharp enough to be remembered. Not clearly, not kindly, but enough. So rest now. The court is quiet, the throne is empty, the halls are filled with different ghosts tonight. You are no longer being watched, no longer being judged, no longer being weighed against a man's ambition. You were a queen, and for a brief, fragile moment, that was almost enough.